I still remember the way Vanessa looked at me that morning, calm, polished, and so sure of herself. Her words landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. "We got married without you, Mr. Hale. Ethan and I decided it was best." Just like that, decades of sacrifice felt erased. She wasn't even angry. She said it like reading the weather forecast, as if leaving me out of my only son's wedding was a matter of social convenience. The smell of her perfume lingered longer than her courtesy. She stood in the middle of my small living room, heels tapping against the old wooden floor I'd refinished myself 15 years ago. The light caught the 3-carat diamond on her finger, a stone that screamed old money. I knew my son's modest marketing job couldn't buy that ring, not without help. Not without someone pulling strings behind the scenes. They'd just come back from a secret wedding in Vegas. No family, no friends, just two people chasing an image of success that wasn't real. Vanessa's smile had the kind of confidence you only get when you think you've outsmarted everyone in the room. But she had no idea what I was really like. She didn't know about the years I'd spent quietly building something solid while pretending to live small. She didn't know that the broke teacher she pitied had written the prenup she'd signed, one that wasn't meant to protect her wealth but my family's. That moment wasn't just about disrespect. It was about erasure. She wanted to wipe me from Ethan's story as if I were an embarrassing footnote. Most parents think the biggest heartbreak is when their child moves away. It's not. It's when your child is convinced that everything you stand for, every sacrifice, every value, is something they need to escape. I stood there, coffee mug in hand, trying to decide if silence was strength or cowardice. My instincts as a father said to let it go, not to make things worse for my son. But the part of me that had once navigated boardrooms and markets whispered that I was watching a hostile takeover, and I'd be a fool to let it happen quietly. She didn't know that prenup she bragged about was written by my lawyer, not hers. And that small detail would change everything. After that day, I started seeing things more clearly. I was no longer just Robert Hale, the father of the groom. In Vanessa's eyes, I had become something smaller, a background prop in her picture-perfect world. I teach American history at a public high school. 56 years old, living in a modest townhouse I bought back in 2008, driving a 2012 Honda Civic that rattles a little when the AC's on. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. My paycheck isn't big, but my life fits within its limits. I take pride in that. To someone like Vanessa, though, those numbers didn't add up to success. She came from Westchester money. You can always tell that kind of upbringing, the polished manners, the subtle glances that size you up, the constant need for aesthetic consistency. She lived in a world where image mattered more than integrity, where worth was measured by what you wore, not what you stood for. The first time I realized how she saw me was during Christmas dinner at her parents' mansion. I was in the kitchen helping the staff clear plates, and I overheard her on the phone. Her voice was soft but sharp enough to cut. She told her friend Ethan's dad is a sweet guy, but he's basically a broke teacher. He lives in some tiny house and drives a 10-year-old car. She wasn't wrong about the details, but she was dead wrong about what those details meant. That house was the roof under which I raised my son after his mother left. That car drove him to every soccer practice, every late-night study session, every hospital visit when he broke his arm. Every cheap thing in my life carried a story she couldn't begin to understand. Still, it wasn't the words that hurt most, it was the tone. That effortless condescension people use when they believe they're being kind. I stayed quiet. People like Vanessa don't respond to lectures. They respond to lessons. Over the next few months, the signs piled up. Vanessa began planning the wedding and hosting what she called family meetings. These meetings were held at high-end restaurants with prefixed menus that cost half my week's pay. I was never invited. When Ethan suggested I join, she waved him off and said, "Your father wouldn't feel comfortable at a place like that." That line stuck with me. People say things like that when what they really mean is he doesn't belong. She was building a world for Ethan that didn't include me. I wasn't angry, just quietly aware. I'd seen people like her my entire career. The ones who mistake modesty for weakness, who think quiet lives mean small dreams. But what Vanessa didn't know was that the man she dismissed had once walked a very different path. There was a time when I wore $1,000 suits and negotiated in glass towers overlooking Manhattan. I left that world to raise my son. I traded Wall Street bonuses for PTA meetings, profit margins for family dinners. People like Vanessa see that as failure. But every choice has a reason, and every sacrifice has its return. I knew that one day she would learn what kind of wealth lasts and what kind only looks good on Instagram. She thought I was invisible, but I was just patient. The cracks began to show long before the wedding. They always do. Pride doesn't explode overnight. It seeps in, quietly disguised as confidence, then grows into something sharper. With Vanessa, it started as subtle remarks and polite smiles that hid barbs underneath. The first moment that truly opened my eyes came during Christmas dinner at her parents' estate. The place looked like a magazine spread, white marble floors, crystal glasses, the smell of truffle oil and perfection. I was in the kitchen stacking plates after the meal when I heard Vanessa's voice drift in from the next room. She was on the phone, laughing lightly. She said, "Ethan's dad is sweet, but come on, he makes less in a year than I spend on handbags." I stood there for a moment, frozen. I wasn't angry. I'd heard worse things in my life. But something in the casual tone, the way she said it without cruelty, as if it were simply fact cut deeper than I expected. That's the thing about arrogance, it doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sounds like laughter echoing through a perfect house. The second sign came a few weeks later. Vanessa began what she called family planning meetings for the wedding. Fancy dinners at places where the appetizers alone cost more than my car insurance. I wasn't invited. When Ethan mentioned me, she brushed it off and said I'd feel out of place. "Your father's more comfortable at simple spots," she told him, like she was doing me a favor. That kind of language is poison disguised as politeness. It doesn't scream exclusion, it whispers it until you start to believe it yourself. I could see Ethan wrestling with it, caught between the woman he loved and the father who'd raised him. What Vanessa didn't realize was that I've seen this playbook before. I used to work on Wall Street. I know what quiet ambition looks like when it starts to see everyone else as leverage. People like her think they're climbing, but really they're trimming away anyone who doesn't fit their version of the view. Each small insult was part of something bigger. She wasn't just preparing for a wedding. She was redesigning Ethan's life. One where I was an accessory that didn't match the decor. I didn't confront her. I didn't tell Ethan what I heard. Instead, I took notes the way I used to track market shifts. When you've spent years analyzing human behavior for profit, you learn that timing is everything. What I saw wasn't just arrogance, it was strategy. And behind her polished smiles, Vanessa was quietly restructuring the family dynamic, deciding who stayed, who faded, and who never got a seat at the table. She didn't know that while she was writing me out of the story, I was already preparing my next chapter. Most people who meet me now see a modest high school teacher who wears the same navy blazer every fall and drives a car that's old enough to vote. They see the small house, the grocery coupons, the quiet routines, and they assume that's all there ever was. But the truth is, my life used to look very different. 20 years ago, I was a senior investment banker at Goldman Sachs. Corner office, city skyline, tailored suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage now. My days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. Numbers, markets, deals, that was my language. At 36, I thought I'd made it. Until the morning my wife walked out. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said she wasn't built for this kind of life. I found myself alone with an 8-year-old boy and a question I couldn't ignore: keep chasing money or start being a father. That decision didn't take long. Within 48 hours, I resigned. I gave up a $500,000 salary, the Manhattan apartment, and every illusion that success meant being indispensable at work. I took a teaching job in a public high school. It paid a fraction of what I used to earn, but it gave me something priceless: time with my son, Ethan. At first I thought I'd left the world of finance behind completely. But habits like that never really fade. You can take a man off Wall Street, but you can't take Wall Street out of his mind. I started investing quietly with what little savings I had left after the divorce. No risks I couldn't explain, no money I couldn't afford to lose. In 2004, everyone laughed at the iPod. I bought Apple. In 2005, Google went public. I bought that too. In 2010, when people said Tesla would never survive, I put in a small stake and held on. I wasn't trying to get rich again. I was trying to build stability, something I could leave behind for Ethan that couldn't be taken away by a layoff or a market crash. I never touched those investments. I lived on my teacher's salary, grading papers late at night and saving every extra dollar. People saw a man who lived small, but I was playing the long game. The kind that doesn't show results on Instagram but compounds in silence. There's a kind of freedom in living below people's expectations. It's like camouflage. You see who's genuine and who only values you for what they think you have. Vanessa never saw the man behind the modest house. She only saw a paycheck. But I didn't mind. I learned a long time ago that real success doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need applause or validation. It just grows quietly like a seed in good soil, waiting for the right season to bloom. Some people think walking away from millions means failure. I think staying in a job that keeps you from your child is the real loss. I gave up Wall Street to teach history, but I was still investing, just in something more meaningful. And one day that quiet investment would tell its own story. The night of the engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the moment everything changed. The setting was picture perfect. The Westchester Country Club, chandeliers glowing like captured stars, soft jazz floating in the air, and every guest dressed to look like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Vanessa's family knew how to host an event that screamed wealth, but what they didn't know was how easily pride can turn a party into a battlefield. I showed up in my best suit, one I'd owned since my Wall Street days. Navy Classic still fit perfectly even after 20 years. I wore it with the same Timex watch I'd had for decades. Not to make a statement, just because it worked. Ethan looked nervous when I arrived, but proud too. He introduced me to people I'd never met. Vanessa's friends, her parents' business associates, people who smiled politely while scanning me up and down like they were appraising furniture. Dinner went smoothly at first. I made small talk with an older man about the rising cost of college tuition. He called me a good man for teaching. That phrase always sounds kind, but it usually comes with an invisible asterisk, good, but not successful. Then came the speeches. Vanessa stood, glass of champagne in hand, the diamond on her finger catching the light like a camera flash. She was confident, radiant, and, as I would soon learn, merciless. She began with the usual gratitude, family love. People smiled, lifted their glasses. Then her tone shifted ever so slightly. She spoke about how she and Ethan came from different worlds, how she had been blessed with advantages, and how Ethan had taught her to appreciate simpler things. The words simpler things landed in the room like a pin drop. I watched her glance in my direction before continuing. Ethan's father has shown me what happens when someone chooses comfort over ambition, she said, smiling sweetly. The air went still. She wasn't just talking about me, she was dissecting me. He's found his level as a teacher living in a modest home driving an old car. And there's nothing wrong with that, she added, as if she was doing me a kindness. Every sentence was a scalpel dressed as a compliment. Her friends laughed politely. A few guests looked away. Ethan squeezed her hand under the table, whispering something, but she brushed him off. I'm grateful Ethan was raised with humble values, she continued. It means he'll never take for granted everything I can offer, the opportunities, the lifestyle, the success he deserves. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just insulting me. She was rewriting our family story. In her version, I wasn't the father who sacrificed a career to raise his son. I was a symbol of what not to become. Ethan tried to diffuse it with a nervous laugh. She doesn't mean anything by it, Dad, he said later, his voice uncertain. But I saw the flicker in his eyes. Doubt. That subtle, dangerous seed of embarrassment that grows when the world convinces you your roots are something to hide. I didn't get angry. I'd spent too many years teaching teenagers to recognize insecurity disguised as arrogance. Vanessa's words weren't about me, they were about her fear. Fear of being ordinary. Fear that money might not be enough to prove her worth. But fear is contagious, and I could see it starting to reach my son. As I sat there cutting my steak into small deliberate pieces, a thought settled into my mind like stone. I could let this continue and watch Ethan drift away, or I could remind both of them what real worth looks like. That night, I decided to act, not out of pride or revenge, but out of love. Because sometimes the only way to protect what you've built is to let the truth do the talking. And soon, the truth would have its moment. After that night, I knew I couldn't confront Vanessa with words. She was too skilled at turning conversation into theater, too comfortable performing righteousness while quietly pulling the strings. People like her don't learn from arguments, they learn from consequences. And consequences need planning. So I did what I used to do best. I strategized, quietly, patiently. The same way I once studied financial markets, looking for patterns, predicting reactions, planning exits before anyone knew there was a game. The first seed I planted came through the prenup. Vanessa had insisted on one, of course. Her family lawyer wanted to protect her assets, even though Ethan barely had any at the time. I didn't argue. I just asked Ethan to request one small addition, a clause about family respect. The lawyer called it a character clause. It stated that if either spouse consistently showed contempt toward parental sacrifice or family devotion, they would forfeit rights to any shared or inherited assets. It sounded poetic harmless, even like a sentimental footnote about family values. Vanessa signed it without reading twice. Most people like her think documents are just paperwork until the ink dries. The second seed grew from a series of small, seemingly random coffee meetings. Once a month, I met my financial advisor, Margaret Lynn, at the same Starbucks near the high school. She's sharp, calm, and discreet, the kind of person who could manage a multi-million-dollar portfolio without ever showing off a designer handbag. We met in plain sight like old friends catching up. Ethan once mentioned it to Vanessa, and she, of course, took the bait. "Your dad sure drinks a lot of coffee with that woman," she'd teased. Think he's finally dating again. Vanessa never suspected that Margaret was the architect behind the trust structure holding every dollar I'd earned since leaving Wall Street. She didn't know that those quiet meetings were strategy sessions, not social visits, and she never asked questions that didn't feed her ego. The third seed was the one she saw most clearly but understood least, the Educators' Excellence Awards. I'd been attending them for over a decade. To most, they looked like small ceremonies celebrating local teachers. But the event also doubled as a fundraiser attended by donors, business leaders, and philanthropists who moved money like oxygen. Every year, I sat in the back applauding others invisible by design. But this time, things were different. That year, I had made a large anonymous donation to the scholarship fund, $500,000 to support single parents pursuing education. My name wasn't on it yet, but soon it would be. These three threads, the clause, the coffee meetings, and the charity event, formed a quiet safety net. Not revenge, but insurance. Because sometimes the best way to fight arrogance is to let it expose itself. I wasn't out to destroy Vanessa. I wanted to protect Ethan and remind him that strength doesn't always shout. Real power is silent, strategic, and moral. It builds in the background until the right moment when truth finally becomes undeniable. Vanessa thought she was curating the perfect story for her social circle. What she didn't realize was that I was curating one, too. One that would show her the cost of underestimating the quiet man in the corner. Every move was in motion now. All I had to do was wait for the right moment for the pieces to fall. A few weeks before the wedding, Vanessa invited me. Well, technically, Ethan invited me to see the venue she had chosen. It was called the Riverside Manor, a grand Victorian estate with sweeping staircases and chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a movie. The kind of place that people pick when they want the world to know they've made it. I walked in wearing my old Navy suit and polished shoes still carrying a faint scuff from years of classroom floors. Ethan looked nervous, but hopeful the way a son does when he wants two worlds to get along. Vanessa was radiant as always, standing in the ballroom like she already owned it. Her cream-colored dress sparkled in the afternoon light, and that familiar diamond on her finger caught every ray of sun. She greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Hale." "I'm glad you could make it," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "We've made a few adjustments to the seating plan just to make everything photograph nicely." I nodded. "Adjustments." She gestured toward the altar area. "The front 2 rows will be for immediate family, my parents, siblings, and some of Ethan's important colleagues." I looked at her, then at Ethan. "And where would that leave me?" She didn't blink. "3rd row is his center seat. Perfect view." Ethan frowned. "Vanessa, he's my father. Shouldn't he be up front?" She placed a hand on his arm. "Sweetheart, we talked about this. It's about the photos. The wedding party needs to look cohesive." Cohesive. That word lingered in the air like the smell of expensive perfume. I didn't need her to explain. She was talking about appearances, how my modest suit would clash with her family's designer attire, how I didn't fit the picture she was crafting. I stayed quiet, watching the tension rise in Ethan's shoulders. Silence can be louder than argument if you hold it long enough. Finally, I asked anything else I should know. She smiled again, that polite, weaponized smile. Yes, actually. We've decided on a no-gift policy. We're only accepting monetary contributions instead. It's more practical for couples at our level. I raised an eyebrow. Your level? Her tone didn't waver. Please don't take it the wrong way, Mr. Hale. A teacher's idea of a wedding gift might not align with our registry. Ethan started to speak, but she cut him off with a laugh. It's just realistic. My dress alone costs more than his annual salary. I could feel Ethan's embarrassment growing beside me, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I gave her a small knowing smile. You done your research, I said. Tell me, what else did you find? She hesitated, but her confidence returned quickly. Enough to know you're a simple man, Mr. Hale. You live in a small house, you drive a 12-year-old car, you gave up a high-paying career for a modest life. I just hope Ethan doesn't make the same mistake. Her words were sharp, but I'd heard sharper. What struck me wasn't her cruelty, it was her certainty. People like Vanessa never question their version of success. They mistake luxury for wisdom. I looked at her calmly and asked, "And what do you think I've built?" She tilted her head. "A comfortable, limited life." "Limited?" I repeated softly. "That's an interesting choice of word." She smiled as if she'd won something. "I prefer to think of it as focused," I said. For the first time, her expression faltered. She couldn't tell if I was agreeing with her or mocking her. That's when she laughed a short, uneasy sound and said, "Focused on what?" "Making just enough to keep the lights on." I met her gaze. No, focused on raising a son who knows the difference between wealth and worth. That silenced her. For a second, I almost saw something human in her face, a flicker of doubt. But it passed, replaced by that same glossy confidence. I smiled politely and adjusted my cufflinks, the same pair I'd worn on my last day at Goldman Sachs. "Don't worry," I said lightly. "You won't have to deal with any embarrassing surprises at the wedding." Of course, that wasn't entirely true. The surprises were already in motion. The character clause, the trust, the quiet investments, all of it was ready. She just didn't know she'd built her own downfall while thinking she was curating perfection. As I left that day, Ethan walked me to the parking lot. He looked conflicted, like he wanted to apologize but didn't know how. I told him not to worry. Let her plan it her way, I said. Sometimes the best lessons don't need to be taught. They teach themselves. He nodded, uncertain. I got into my old Honda, started the engine, and watched the Manor disappear in the rearview mirror. Some people build castles out of appearances. I prefer foundations built on truth. And soon enough, one of those castles was about to crumble. That night, after the venue visit, my phone buzzed around 10. Ethan's name lit up the screen. I could tell from the pause in his voice before he spoke that something was bothering him. "Dad," he said quietly, "what did you mean earlier when you said, 'real money'? Vanessa's been asking me about it all evening." I smiled to myself. It wasn't the question that made me pause, it was who he said was asking. I could almost picture her pacing their apartment, still unsettled by how calm I'd been at the venue. People like Vanessa hate uncertainty. They can handle confrontation, but silence. Silence terrifies them. I leaned back in my chair, the sound of the clock ticking in the background. Real money, I said, isn't the kind people feel the need to show off. It doesn't scream, it doesn't brag, and it doesn't buy approval. It's steady, it's earned, and it works while you sleep. There was a long silence. Then he said, "You make it sound like something more than numbers." "It is," I replied. "Real money buys freedom, not validation. It doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you've been the whole time. Some people earn it quietly, others pretend to have it loudly. And the difference only shows when things go wrong." I could hear him processing it, trying to fit that idea into his world, the world he shared with a woman obsessed with appearances. I didn't push further. He wasn't ready yet. Lessons like that don't stick when they're preached. They stick when life proves them true. "Dad," he said after a moment, "Vanessa keeps asking if you're hiding something. She said the way you smiled today felt unsettling." I laughed softly. "Maybe I am hiding something," I said. "Maybe I just learned that some truths need to wait for the right moment." He chuckled a little nervously. "You always talk in riddles." "That's because some things aren't meant to be handed over in plain words," I told him. "You have to see them for yourself. And soon you will." We said goodnight. When the line went silent, I sat there for a while staring at the folder of investment reports on my desk. 20 years of quiet decisions, steady growth, and unwavering patience. Vanessa thought wealth was about shiny surfaces, rings, houses, cars, status. She never understood that real wealth doesn't sparkle under lights. It compounds in silence. That call confirmed one thing for me: she was starting to sense the shift. The ground beneath her confidence was no longer solid. The act was cracking just slightly, but enough for me to see through. The moment she asked Ethan that question, I knew we were getting close to the turning point. The one where pretense meets proof. And soon she'd see exactly what real money looked like. The night of the Educators' Excellence Awards arrived with little fanfare. It was one of those evenings that felt ordinary on the surface, but I knew it was about to shift the entire story. Ethan had finally agreed to come, and Vanessa, ever the social climber, insisted on joining once she learned the event was held at a downtown hotel ballroom. She saw it as another opportunity to be photographed in the right crowd, not realizing she was walking straight into a lesson she'd never forget. The ballroom was filled with teachers, administrators, and local donors. It wasn't a glamorous crowd, no designer gowns, no champagne towers, just honest people in their Sunday best, smiling proudly at their work. Vanessa looked uncomfortable from the moment she stepped inside. I caught her glancing at the decorations, clearly unimpressed. "How long is this going to take?" she whispered to Ethan. 2 hours, maybe less," I said before he could answer. "But I promise it'll be worth your time." We found our seats near the back, where I always preferred to be. Across the room, Margaret Lynn caught my eye. She was dressed in her usual quiet elegance, a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Vanessa's entire outfit, but never tried to show it. She walked over with her warm, effortless confidence. "Robert," she said, giving me a quick hug. "So glad you made it tonight." Vanessa's eyes flicked from Margaret's watch to her shoes, her brain instantly calculating prices. "Oh, you must be the teacher's friend he has coffee with," she said, her tone polite but probing. Margaret smiled. "More like his financial advisor. Robert's one of my oldest and most successful clients." Vanessa blinked. Successful Margaret didn't elaborate, and I didn't need her to. The silence did more damage than any explanation could. The ceremony began the kind of slow, heartfelt event most people only half listened to until the final award was announced. The principal stepped up to the podium, clearing his throat. Tonight, he said, we honor someone who represents what education truly means. Someone who has quietly supported students not just with his time, but with extraordinary generosity. Ethan sat up straighter. Vanessa's phone slipped slightly in her hand. This individual has donated over $3.8 million to educational causes over the past decade, the principal continued. Scholarships for children of single parents, classroom technology mentorship programs, all anonymously. A ripple moved through the room. Vanessa's head turned toward me slowly, her expression frozen between disbelief and confusion. And tonight the principal said we present our first Lifetime Achievement Award for Educational Philanthropy to Mr. Robert Hale. The applause hit like a wave. I stood smoothing my old suit jacket and made my way to the stage. Ethan's mouth was open. Vanessa didn't clap. I looked out at the crowd, teachers, students, community leaders, and felt something settle inside me. Not pride exactly, more like peace. Thank you, I began. I've been a teacher for over 20 years, and people often assume that means I left success behind. But success isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you multiply. The room quieted. I used to work in finance, I said. I left that world when I realized that the real compound interest in life isn't found in bank accounts, it's found in people. Every student I've mentored, every scholarship I've helped fund, that's the kind of growth that never stops paying dividends. I paused, letting the words breathe. Wealth, I continued, isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove itself. It's not the car you drive or the suit you wear. True wealth is silent and consistent. It builds while you're busy doing what matters. The applause came again, louder this time. I caught Ethan's eyes shining with tears and then Vanessa's. Her face was pale, her posture stiff. For the first time since I'd met her, she was speechless. I returned to the table to a standing ovation. Ethan grabbed my hand. "Dad," he whispered, voice breaking, "I had no idea." "That was the point," I said softly. "You should respect the man before you respect the money." Vanessa couldn't speak. Her glass trembled in her hand. She looked at Margaret, who smiled gently and added, "Your father-in-law's portfolio has been one of the most remarkable I've ever managed. 31.2 million built from discipline and patience, not showmanship." The sound of the words 31 million rippled through Vanessa's mind like a thunderclap. I could see it in her eyes, regret, calculation, maybe even fear. She had spent months trying to erase me, not realizing she'd been standing on the edge of a story she didn't understand. When the applause faded and the crowd dispersed, I leaned toward Ethan and said, "Remember this, son. Wealth that talks too much is usually insecure. The kind that stays quiet, that's the kind that lasts." That night, I didn't need to say anything else. The truth had spoken for me. 3 days after the awards night, Vanessa finally learned what happens when arrogance meets paperwork. The meeting took place in a downtown law office, the kind with marble floors and the faint smell of expensive coffee. On one side of the long conference table sat Vanessa, her parents, and their lawyer, a sleek man named Harrison Mitchell, who looked more nervous than confident. On the other side sat me, my attorney, Patricia Wong, and Ethan, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Vanessa wore oversized sunglasses even indoors, maybe to hide the redness in her eyes, or maybe because she thought hiding behind designer frames would make her seem composed. But her hands trembled when she took them off. Harrison started with a forced smile. "Let's try to make this simple," he said. We've reviewed the prenuptial agreement and need to clarify what exactly this clause entails. Patricia, calm as ever, placed a thick folder on the table. You're referring to the character clause, she said evenly. It protects family assets from any spouse who displays sustained contempt toward a parent or family member, especially through humiliation, disrespect, or public mockery. Vanessa straightened. That's ridiculous. You can't define contempt with one speech. Patricia opened the folder and slid a USB drive across the table. This is the engagement party footage from the Westchester Country Club, she said. It contains your full speech, including your remarks about Mr. Hale's career financial status and so-called mediocrity. We also have 12 witness statements describing your behavior as intentionally demeaning. The color drained from Vanessa's face. That was taken out of context. No, Patricia replied gently. It was taken from a microphone. The room went silent. Ethan didn't look at her. He just stared at his hands, his jaw tight. Harrison shifted in his seat. So, what are the financial implications? Patricia glanced at me before answering. When the clause is triggered, the offending spouse forfeits all rights to marital assets, including any increase in value of the family's existing holdings. Vanessa's father leaned forward. What does that mean in plain terms? I looked at him directly. It means that right now, everything you assumed your daughter was marrying into the houses, the portfolio, the investments belongs to the Hale Family Trust. And because the clause has been activated, Vanessa has no legal access to any of it. Her mother gasped quietly. Her father leaned back in his chair staring at the table. Vanessa's voice cracked. So, what do I get? Patricia closed one folder and opened another. Mr. Hale has prepared a settlement offer. He's willing to establish a separate fund of $500,000 as a goodwill gesture, money you'll keep regardless of what happens to the marriage. Vanessa blinked. $500,000? That's it. I nodded. More than you've ever earned yourself. Consider it an expensive lesson on the value of respect. Ethan finally spoke. His voice was soft but steady. Vanessa, my father gave up a Wall Street career to raise me. He sacrificed everything, and you mocked him for it. This isn't about money, it's about character. Her lip trembled. I made a mistake, Patricia interjected smoothly. A very costly one. If you sign today, you walk away with the settlement. If not, we move forward with litigation, and you walk away with nothing but legal fees. Harrison looked defeated. Mrs. Hale, he said you should take this offer. The clause is airtight. We could fight for years and still lose. Vanessa's composure cracked. You set me up, she said to me, her voice trembling. No, I said quietly. I gave you a chance to show who you really were. You did the rest. The meeting ended in silence. Vanessa stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor, and stormed out with her sunglasses back on. Her heels echoed down the hallway like a retreating drumbeat. Ethan stayed seated for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner. You weren't supposed to, I said. Some truths only reveal themselves when they have to. Through the office window, I watched Vanessa pacing outside, probably calling her parents or her lawyer again, trying to rewrite the reality she'd built. But there are some contracts no amount of charm can renegotiate, the kind written not on paper, but in behavior. By the next day, the papers were signed. Vanessa took her $500,000 check and walked away no longer a Hale in name or spirit. It wasn't revenge, it was consequence. And sometimes that's the most powerful kind of justice there is. The next morning, the air in the law office felt heavy, the kind of silence that hangs before a storm. The blinds were half closed, muting the sunlight into gray stripes across the conference table. Papers were stacked neatly. 2 lawyers, 4 parents, and 1 broken marriage sat facing each other like pieces on a chessboard. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes late, her designer heels echoing down the hall like a drumbeat of defiance. She looked like someone holding on to the last fragments of control. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, eyes that revealed she hadn't slept. Her parents followed, tight-lipped and tense. Across from them, Ethan looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Patricia Wong, my attorney, sat beside me with calm precision, her folder already open. Harrison, Vanessa's lawyer, tried to sound confident, but his voice wavered. "We've reviewed the documents," he began, "and we need to understand the extent of the damages." Patricia didn't waste time. She slid a USB drive across the table. "You'll find video evidence from the engagement party. The complete speech where Mrs. Hale ridiculed her father-in-law's profession, income, and life choices in front of dozens of witnesses." She opened another file. "We also have signed statements from 12 attendees confirming her comments and tone were deliberately humiliating. There's more emails and text messages referring to Mr. Hale as an embarrassment and a conversation suggesting he should be moved to assisted living for the sake of appearances." The room fell silent. Vanessa's mother covered her mouth. Her father stared down at his watch. Ethan couldn't look up. Vanessa whispered, "That was all taken out of context." Patricia's tone stayed professional but firm. "It's not out of context when you're recorded insulting someone repeatedly. The clause in the prenup is very clear. Contempt for family sacrifice results in forfeiture of marital rights." Her lawyer cleared his throat. "So, what does that mean in practical terms?" Patricia turned to me. I nodded. "It means," she said, "Vanessa loses all claims to the Hale family trust, every cent of the $31 million in assets. The trust is protected by structure and intent. She cannot access, inherit, or benefit from any part of it." The color drained from Vanessa's face. "So I get nothing." Patricia opened a different folder and placed a single-page document on the table. "Mr. Hale has made a settlement offer. You can sign this today, waive all current and future rights to the trust, and receive $500,000. It's yours to keep unconditionally." Harrison's head tilted. Lesson payment?" I smiled faintly. "A life lesson," I said, "not a punishment. I'm not here to destroy her. I just want her to understand the value of respect before she learns it the hard way." Vanessa stared at the paper, her breathing uneven. "You set this up. You planned it all." "No," I said quietly. "You set it up when you confused humility with weakness. All I did was let your choices prove who you really were." Ethan finally found his voice. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, eyes glistening. "You didn't deserve any of this. I should have stood up for you." I looked at him and shook my head. "You shouldn't have had to. Real respect isn't something you demand. It's something people give freely when they recognize integrity. Don't lose that lesson." Vanessa turned to Ethan, tears finally breaking through. "Ethan, please, I was wrong. I didn't mean those things. I was just trying to fit in." He looked at her, then down at the table. "You weren't trying to fit in," he said quietly. "You were trying to climb over everyone else." The silence after that was thick. Even her parents didn't come to her defense. They just sat there watching their daughter's world collapse under the weight of her own arrogance. Patricia gathered her files. Mrs. Hale, she said if you want the settlement, you'll need to sign today. Otherwise, we move forward, and you'll walk away with nothing but court fees. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something. Vanessa nodded numbly. She picked up the pen with trembling fingers and signed. The sound of the pen scratching across paper was final, like a door closing. Patricia slid the check toward her. $500,000, she said softly. A costly education, but one that might still save you from worse mistakes. Vanessa stared at it, but she didn't speak. As she left the room, the click of her heels was slower this time, almost hollow. Ethan sat back in his chair, shoulders sagging. "I don't know how to thank you, Dad," he said. "You don't need to," I replied. "Just remember what this really was. Not revenge, not victory, just balance." I looked toward the window, the city skyline hazy beyond the glass. "The thing about respect," I said, "is that it's more valuable than money because once you lose it, there's no amount that can buy it back." Outside, Vanessa was already on her phone trying to rewrite her story to someone else. But in that room, for the first time in a long time, the truth finally felt settled. And for me, that was worth far more than any fortune. Within a week, the story spread faster than any of us could have imagined. It started small, a clip from the awards ceremony filmed by a student and posted on social media. In the video, I stood on stage in my old suit, thanking the audience and talking about wealth, not as a number, but as something you multiply through kindness and purpose. The caption read, "This teacher secretly built a $31 million portfolio and donated millions to his students." By morning, the video had exploded. The hashtag @TeacherMillionaire began trending across Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. People loved the irony. A quiet high school teacher who'd been dismissed as a failure by his glamorous daughter-in-law turned out to be a multi-millionaire philanthropist. News outlets picked it up next. Forbes ran a piece titled "The Humble Investor Who Outsmarted Wall Street." Local papers reprinted the story under headlines like "Teacher Next Door Hides $31 million Fortune," and "The Man Who Proved Respect is Priceless." Meanwhile, Vanessa's social circle, those same influencer friends who once praised her perfect life, turned the story into gossip fuel. Screenshots of her cruel engagement speech resurfaced. People reposted it with captions like, "When you mock your millionaire father-in-law because you think he's broke." Her phone reportedly wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Old college friends texted to ask if the story was true. Some congratulated her for marrying rich, not realizing she'd just signed away every cent. Others mocked her, saying things like, "Guess the photos didn't come out as cohesive as you wanted." The humiliation she'd feared so desperately, the one she'd tried to prevent by erasing me from her wedding, had come full circle. Except this time, she wasn't controlling the narrative. Vanessa postponed the wedding indefinitely. She told people it was for personal reasons, but everyone knew why. The internet had already drawn its own conclusions. The woman who once cared only about appearances now couldn't bear to show her face. For someone like her, social embarrassment is worse than financial loss. Money can be replaced. Reputation can't. Ethan called me one evening, his voice weary. "Dad, it's gotten bad. Vanessa's friends won't talk to her. Even her parents are avoiding questions. She's shutting everyone out." I paused before answering. "Son, this was never about revenge," I said. "What she's feeling right now isn't punishment, it's consequence. She built her life on perception, and now perception has turned against her. He was quiet for a moment. You really think she'll learn from this? I hope so, I said, honestly. Sometimes the universe doesn't shout lessons, it echoes them. The echo just takes longer to fade when it's public. A week later, one of my students sent me a message. Mr. Hale, I showed your video to my parents. My dad said you made him rethink what success really means. I read it twice before replying, That's what real wealth is, kid, when your story helps someone else write a better one. Vanessa disappeared from social media soon after. Her last post was a photo of the beach in California, captioned simply, New Beginnings. No ring, no hashtags, no comments. There was a time when she'd feared I might embarrass her in public. But life, in its quiet symmetry, had written a far better twist than I ever could. The man she thought would tarnish her image became the world's symbol of integrity. And the woman obsessed with perfection became a cautionary tale about what happens when you mistake status for character. In the end, the internet didn't ruin Vanessa's life. It just revealed the truth she'd tried so hard to hide. The next afternoon, everything ended quietly, not with a fight, not with shouting, but with the soft sound of a pen on paper. Vanessa walked into the law office looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The sharp edges of her confidence had worn away, replaced by something close to defeat. Her eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses again, though no amount of tinted glass could hide what exhaustion had done to her. Patricia, my attorney, had already prepared the final documents. On the table lay the settlement agreement, 3 pages long, precise, and simple. It spelled out everything in clear terms. Vanessa would forfeit all rights to the Hale Family Trust and its $31 million in assets. In exchange, she would receive a single payment of $500,000. The amount wasn't meant to hurt her. It was meant to teach her. Patricia slid the papers across the table. Vanessa sat down without saying a word. Ethan was beside her, his jaw tight, but his expression calm. Her parents had chosen not to attend. I couldn't blame them. Patricia's tone was neutral, as always. Mrs. Hale, once you sign, the matter is closed. No appeals, no revisions. You'll receive your payment within 24 hours. Vanessa stared at the paper for a long time. Her perfectly manicured fingers hovered over the pen. You could almost see the storm inside her, the disbelief, the regret, the quiet anger at a world that had suddenly stopped bending to her will. She finally spoke, her voice trembling. You really think this makes you better than me? I met her gaze. No, it doesn't make me better. It just means I stopped letting people treat decency like weakness. She hesitated, then signed. One signature. One sigh. One chapter closed. Patricia handed her the check, crisp, official, and strangely small for everything it represented. Vanessa held it for a moment like she couldn't decide whether to clutch it or throw it back. I stood and said quietly, You still came out ahead. Money can buy a lot of things, comfort, security, even the illusion of control. But when it buys you a lesson this important, it's worth every penny. Vanessa's eyes glistened. What lesson? That respect isn't something you demand from others. It's something you earn by how you treat them, I said. You measured people by what they had. I measured them by what they gave. One of those currencies never loses value. She said nothing. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Not because she lost the money, but because she'd never understood what it meant to have something money couldn't buy. Ethan stood slowly. "Vanessa," he said gently, "I wish things had been different." She didn't look at him. "So do I," she whispered. Patricia gathered the documents, neatly stacking them into a folder. "We're done here," she said softly. Vanessa rose, slipping the check into her purse like it might burn her fingers. She paused at the door, turned back to me, and for a split second, I saw the woman. She could have been the one who might have learned humility before it was too late. But the moment passed. She left without another word. The sound of the door closing was quiet but final. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I can't believe it's over." "It's not over," I said. "It's just balanced. There's a difference." He nodded, slowly, eyes still fixed on the empty doorway. "You didn't even raise your voice once," he said. I smiled. "Real justice doesn't need to shout." Outside, the world carried on as if nothing had happened, cars, passing people, heading to lunch, unaware that inside that office a man had just reclaimed his dignity without throwing a single punch. Sometimes victory isn't about winning louder. It's about walking away knowing the truth is already speaking for you. And in that silence, justice felt complete. A few days after Vanessa signed the papers, the storm finally began to quiet. Reporters moved on to the next trending scandal. Social media found a new villain, and for the first time in months, I could sit at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and just breathe. That's when Ethan showed up. No cameras, no suit, just jeans and a hoodie, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag of bagels, our old Saturday ritual before life got complicated. He sat down across from me, quiet at first, just looking around my small townhouse like he was seeing it for the first time. The same place he used to run through as a kid, building pillow forts and doing homework at the kitchen counter. "Dad," he said, finally, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realized something." I waited. "When Vanessa said you'd failed, I believed her. Not because I thought you were a failure, but because I thought success meant never struggling again. But now I see it. You didn't give up success. You just changed what it meant." I smiled. "What do you think it means now?" He leaned forward. "You chose me. That's what success is, isn't it? Choosing people over things, values over comfort." For a second, I couldn't speak. I'd spent years wondering if he'd ever understand that, and here he was, saying it better than I ever could. We talked for hours that morning about choices, about how easy it is to confuse status with worth, and about how silence can sometimes be stronger than confrontation. Then, for the first time, Ethan asked me to teach him something new. "Show me how to invest," he said. "Not just in stocks, but in the way you did it with purpose." So I pulled out the old folder from my desk, the one filled with 20 years of statements, notes, and handwritten calculations. We started from the beginning: compound growth, long-term patience, emotional discipline. He listened like a student, but this time it wasn't numbers he was learning. It was perspective. A few weeks later, I handed him a second folder. Inside was a trust document with his name on it. He looked at me startled. "What's this, your inheritance?" I said. "Structured for when you're ready, not now." He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing as he read. "There are conditions." "Yes," I said, "a few simple ones." I pointed to the list. 1. You have to earn at least $30,000 a year on your own. Not from investments, not from me, but through your own work. 2. No gambling, no reckless spending, no supporting anyone who disrespects family. 3. You must keep building something meaningful, something that gives back more than it takes. He looked up from the papers. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. I'm not raising another trust fund adult. You've got my name, not my shortcut. He nodded, slowly processing it all. Then he smiled, the same quiet, grateful smile I hadn't seen since he was a boy. That's fair. Over the next few months, Ethan began turning his life around. He threw himself into work with new focus, started studying finance, and even volunteered to speak at community workshops about budgeting and debt. One day, he told me he wanted to teach financial literacy to young people to show them that wealth isn't about how much you have, but how much you understand. That night, I felt something shift in me. Pride, yes, but also relief. Because this wasn't about reclaiming money or status, it was about legacy. He looked across the table at me and said, "You know, Dad, I used to think your life was small, but now I see it's the opposite. You built something big just quietly." I laughed softly. Real wealth doesn't need to announce itself, son. It grows while you're busy living the life that matters. Ethan nodded. "And I think I finally get it now." "Good," I said, standing to refill our coffee. "Because that understanding, that's your real inheritance." As the evening light filled the room, I realized something simple but profound. The money, the lessons, the long game, it all came down to this one truth: I didn't choose between success and family. I chose family as my definition of success. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Months passed, and life finally settled into something peaceful again. The noise of scandal had faded, replaced by quiet mornings, real conversations, and the kind of calm that money can't buy. Ethan still stopped by every Saturday with coffee, but now our talks weren't about regret, they were about purpose. One evening, as we sat in the same kitchen where he'd done his homework as a kid, Ethan looked up from his notebook and said, "Dad, I've been thinking, what if we built something together? Something that lasts longer than either of us." That question became the seed of what would grow into the Hale Foundation for Financial Education. It started small, just an idea scribbled on a napkin between sips of black coffee. But we both knew what we wanted it to stand for: helping young adults understand what real wealth is before the world convinces them otherwise. We'd seen too many people chase shiny things that faded fast. The foundation would be different. It wouldn't just talk about money, it would talk about meaning. Ethan took the lead. He spent months designing workshops for high school and college students, teaching them how to budget, invest, and make choices that build long-term security instead of short-term satisfaction. But more than that, he taught them about value, the kind that can't be withdrawn or stolen. At the first seminar, I stood in the back of the classroom watching as Ethan explained compound interest, using a simple story about patience and consistency. He wasn't talking like a banker or an academic. He spoke like someone who'd lived it, who'd seen what happens when people confuse image with integrity. A young woman raised her hand and asked, "What's the most important thing your father taught you about money?" Ethan paused, smiled, and said, "That real wealth is quiet. It doesn't need to impress anyone. It grows while you focus on what matters: family, character, and contribution." The room went silent for a moment. Then a few students began to nod. You could tell the message hit home. Afterward, we stood outside the school, watching the sunset over the parking lot. "You did good," I told him. "You found your voice." He shook his head. "No, Dad. You gave me the example. I just found the words." That night I sat alone in my study, surrounded by the same files and notes that had carried me through decades of quiet work. For years, those documents had been proof of what I'd built. But now as I looked at them, they felt less like trophies and more like tools, something to hand off, not hold on to. The foundation grew slowly but steadily. We started partnering with schools, nonprofits, and even small businesses that wanted to teach their employees about financial literacy. Every new workshop reminded me of why I'd chosen this life in the first place. It wasn't to prove anyone wrong. It was to show that success doesn't have to shout. It can whisper and still change everything. One evening, Ethan and I were reviewing the Foundation's progress reports when he said something that stopped me cold. You know, he said, people always say success is about what you achieve, but I think it's about what you pass on. I smiled. Then, we've already succeeded. The Hale Foundation kept growing, one classroom, one student, one story at a time. But the real legacy wasn't the money we invested, it was the mindset we left behind. Because in the end, wealth isn't the number in your bank account. It's the impact you leave when you're gone. It's a son who turns lessons into action. It's a classroom full of young minds learning that worth can't be measured in dollars. It's the quiet pride of knowing that the things you built with patience will outlast the things built for show. That's what real success looks like. Not loud, not flashy, not fleeting. Just steady, honest, and built to last. And as I watched my son carry forward that truth, I realized the final lesson of all. You don't measure your life by what you earn. You measure it by who you raise and what they choose to build next. When the dust finally settled, I looked around at everything that had survived, not the house, not the bank accounts, but the things that actually mattered. My relationship with my son, my peace, my self-respect. The money, the trust, the headlines, those were temporary storms. But what stayed was the quiet knowledge that I hadn't lost myself trying to prove my worth to people who never intended to see it. For years, Vanessa tried to define me by what I earned, by the car I drove, by the simplicity of my life. But here's what I learned the hard way: you can't let anyone measure your value with their shallow ruler. Your paycheck isn't your worth. Your house doesn't determine your dignity. And silence, when used wisely, can carry more power than 1,000 arguments. I didn't fight back with rage or revenge. I fought back with preparation, with the law, with patience, and with truth. And when the time came, justice didn't need to shout. It just showed up quietly and completely. Some people think power means speaking louder. But real strength is knowing when to let facts, not emotions, do the talking. That's what I hope my story proves, that the right mix of calm clarity and consequence can achieve more than anger ever will. If I had lashed out, I might have lost my son forever. Instead, I chose restraint. I chose to trust time, and time, it turns out, is the best witness you can have. Now, years later, I see Ethan thriving. He carries himself differently, not with the arrogance of money, but with the steadiness of character. And every time I see him teaching others what real wealth means, I'm reminded that the fight was worth it. So if you take one thing away from my story, let it be this: don't let anyone define your worth by your income. And remember, sometimes justice comes not from shouting, but from being still long enough for the truth to echo. Because when you protect your dignity, your family, and your values, you don't just keep your home, you keep yourself whole. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in my place, would you have included a clause like mine in the prenup? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have fought louder? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them. And remember, real wealth isn't what you show. It's what you build quietly and protect fiercely.